Welcome to Telegeography Explains the Internet, the show that explores the business behind all of the ways humans stay connected around the world. I'm your host, Greg Bryan, and my guest today is Dario Betti, CEO of the Mobile Ecosystem Forum. I enjoy having industry association folks on the podcast because they can pull back from the perspective of a single vendor or operator and give us a picture of the key issues in a particular area of the telecom industry, which is exactly what Dario does in this interview for all things mobile. Dario first explains what the MEF does and does not do for its members, and then the rest of our conversation gets into a great overview of the key issues at play in the global mobile market. We talk about fraud, of course, and always needing to stay one step ahead of the bad guys. We talk about what is happening with roaming as carriers turn off 2 and 3G networks. We talk about security for mobile networks and meeting the ever-increasing mobile bandwidth demands. And of course, we couldn't not talk about 5G and even, 6G mobile service and what we see happening there. So we cover a lot of ground, and I think you'll find it to be a useful review of what is top of mind in the mobile world presently. Enjoy. Okay, welcome to the show, Dario.
Hello there. Thanks for having me here.
Absolutely. I really like your room tableau. It looks like you're a model builder, maybe. Lots of...
Some of these give it away. No.
Yeah.
And there's a famous build block that I shall mention.
Yes, exactly. Isn't it? No, so trademark issues or whatever. But yes, it definitely. I bought my son a fancy version of that same toy for Christmas this year, and we haven't gotten around to building it yet. So you've inspired me. I need to get to it. So, yeah. Dario, could you give us a brief background on yourself? You're the CEO at the Mobile Ecosystem Forum. How did you get there and end up at the top of the Mobile Ecosystem Forum?
Well, probably serendipity. I didn't plan to or even think that I was going to be that involved in math.
Those are the best career paths, the ones that take you by surprise while you're just working, right? So, yeah.
So that it was. Now, my career, because I started being an analyst in telecom and mobile telecom late 90s, and then I ended up working for mobile operators. Surprisingly, all throughout my careers, all my employers were all members of MEF, so I always lived with MEF.
Mm-hmm.
At one point, I was in the board of MEF, so I was elected to represent one of the operator. I was working in Russia at the time, and I was representing it there. And after that, it was a bit of a transformation, and I was asked to take part. There we go, in this transformation. So MEF, just like the industry, have changed, and eventually one of the changes, they picked up somebody that didn't work into the organization, so the trade association, really. And that was 5 years ago.
Yeah.
So there we go. And so a background in mobile operator more than anything else. And now managing different conversation with different people and different expertise. I really like it. It's very exciting.
Yeah, absolutely. So, and you already cleared up one of my questions, which is, are we saying MEF, MEF? Because I've also had on the show a couple of times the folks from the Metro Ethernet Forum. Of course, it's there's two MEFs in the industry, but we'll work through it.
Exactly. I guess MEF is now called as the MEF Forum. And
right. Okay.
Of course, and we are MEF. But I think confusion will continue as I said. It changes also. We had a clearer path before between the forum and ourselves. But it's good to having more people talking about exciting stuff. So that's our problem. Yeah. And in reality, you can call MEF as you wanted. Where some people refer as MEF or MEF, but our full name is a Mobile Ecosystem Forum. There we
gotcha.
Go.
I'm going to say MEF because that's easier. It rolls out.
Here we go.
Yeah. So why don't we start there with maybe give us so all the organizations you worked with had already been in MEF. It's been around a while. Could you just give us a brief history of the organization and what its purpose was in the industry?
Yes. So the Mobile Ecosystem Forum begins in the year 2000, first as another official, but it's got an official starts in February 2001 when it was incorporated. So by now it would be a 22-year-old company also. Why did it start? Because there were multiple places to talk about mobile, but this wanted to be a place where everybody had an equal say, looking at the ecosystem since the beginning. And so looking at the fact that there might be big companies, small companies, there might be mobile operators, but wholesalers, there might be content providers that were just coming to the field. And by now we have banks, retailers that are part of our associations. All of them are delivering their services on mobile. Mobile is everywhere. All of them have got a say in mobile and a different perspective. So we look at the different parts, and we are a place for people to go, talk, and act on mobile.
Right. So why do you think that is necessary in the industry for providers, and you even mentioned like banks, for example, to get together and sort of work these things out when ultimately they are in competition with each other, more or less, right? So
absolutely. Well, sometimes it's easier to say that a trade association, you know that your trade association will represent your interest as trade X, as mobile operator, as bank, etc. And they exist, and they should be. What we look at, what sometimes it's not easy to address as just one player or one type of player. Sometimes the education of the entire market. So that's why you go and talk to multiple players and enrich the solutions. Sometimes you talk about bad things as well, like fraud. Now, fraudsters, they like chains because, services are delivered by so many people. So they try to find the weakness and attack the weakness. And you cannot look at this weakness unless you work together, end to end. So that's some of the reasons why the ecosystem view is more important. And the mobile market is one that has changed towards a more equal ecosystem. Let's face it, in the late 90s, the mobile operators had a very quick, and stronghold on the market. They decided what they wanted to do because of their services. The new model that we see now has opened up a lot of services on top with the internet, and that means that, well, everybody is part of it, but the operators are not responsible for everybody else's business either. So how do we make sure that they all collaborate? Because a lot of customers will go and call back their operator as soon as something bad happens, but then the operator wouldn't necessarily know what's happening with someone.
Right. You need to know which throat to choke and how it goes along that chain, right? So
exactly. Yeah. Sometimes it's a question of communication and alignment. It's as simple as that.
Yeah. Yeah, that's it. It's interesting. I actually just had on the show Philippe Millet from the i3 Forum, and he had a similar kind of take on what they're doing. Of course, they're more in the sort of switch voice kind of industry, but especially on fraud, that it's in everyone's best interest to get together and stay ahead of the fraudsters together, rather than wait and try to blame it on the other carrier or whatever the case may be. So.
A philosophy that we subscribe to. As a matter of fact, I spoke to him last week as well.
All right, yeah.
And the reason why, because we believe that is, there is a common goal, and we all need to make sure that we articulate, we use our scarce resources, to maximum effect. As interestingly, we realized that fraudsters collaborate with each other.
Wow. Yeah, right. I mean, they have their own sort of fraudulent industry standards, I guess. Right?
I don't know what it's called, and I'm sure they don't want me around. But I would like to know more about it. But really realizing these things makes it even more important that we collaborate. Well, we're trying to do some of that and open the sun as well. So we are under the sun with our activities, some of them, and very nice. In the i3 Forum, they also support one of our activities in the A2P, so the business messaging area, and we're going to rejuvenate that discussion right now. So there's plenty happening that I was saying, but there should be plenty more. I mean, my discussion with Philippe is how can we do more of this stuff?
Yeah, absolutely, and that works well with some of what I talked about with him. Along the lines of these folks that you're bringing together are competitive. You're trying to get them to agree on standards. Is that a difficult part of your job as the CEO, to get all these clocks to chime at once, if you will?
And so much that I tell everybody that's not my job.
Right. Yeah.
Too difficult. But on a serious point, what we look at is, as math, we don't look at the standard per se, and we'll come back to that if you want, because standards are essentials, and let's flag them up. If standards are good, we should go for it. What we looked at math, as we don't own any standards, we look at processes. We look at business and business questions. Now, some businesses have got evident issues that they need to deal with.
Right.
A coordinated or a single response is what is needed sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
So we almost look at the why, no, and some of the technology out there is probably
Mm-hmm.
the how. But
Right.
because we all come together, it's very difficult to agree on a common thing. But it's probably easier to start and looking at and agreeing that there's a common pain. Let's look at that,
Mm-hmm.
and then to start to have a debate on how it's best to go forward
Right.
and to deal with it. So absolutely, we want to have the end goal is the same, to have a common response or as common as possible. We don't tell them what the answer is, but we facilitate discussions, which usually brings to that
I see.
conclusion.
I see. So to put a shine a light directly on what you're saying there. So you're saying you don't have, say, like technical working groups that get out and actually design the technical standards or open APIs with each other or something like that. It's more like decision makers focusing on what are the issues that we can all talk about and work out, that sort of thing.
Yeah, absolutely, and that's what we like to be. We identify the mobile ecosystem forum as a very neutral. So
Mm-hmm.
what we didn't want to have is, apart from any commercial question, which is easier, so we make money from membership. Our members pay us money
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
for existing. That's it. But
Right.
we also don't do a specific implementation,
Right.
meaning that there are lots of other associations, a lot of our organizations out there that are doing great work in standardization of technologies. What we want to is people to come and talk about it and then have a discussion and see what's out there, even
Mm-hmm.
presenting all of them, and then making whatever choices they aspire to. But all of that trying to collaborate, the kind of what you were pointed out before, herding cats. You didn't
Mm-hmm.
say, but it's pretty
Yeah.
much
Yeah.
what it
Yeah.
feels like sometimes. But it's true because I was an operator, and there are different aspirations, there are different resources level. But what it's obvious is they were coming from the same framework, some of these
Mm-hmm.
players. And once you realize, even if it's a different player, you do realize that you have to do something and something together. So we bring them to that realization, if you want. We
Right.
bring the conversation to that level. And then, let's alone, let's make a decision whether X, Y, or Z. It's great to have options.
Mm-hmm.
But that's what we focus on.
Got it. That makes sense. All right. So maybe we could get here into some of the sort of specific issues that you think are important in the industry. And I thought maybe we would start with roaming because that's an experience that everyone has had, right? Roaming out of their provider's network. What is important to you in the world of roaming out there in the mobile marketplace today?
Well, that's one of those things that we started, and back to what you were asking me for, why MEF existed, is to look at the consumer and improve their life with
Hmm.
services like mobile and defend it from the issues that are best. And I think when we started in early 2000, roaming was one of those things that everybody was proud about in the
Mm.
industry, and rightly so. A lot of work went in the late 90s and then the early 2000s to get it work.
Hmm.
All of his networks across all of different countries, being able to pick up the phone, and technically the phone itself works across all of his geographies. And
It's an
somehow,
amazing feat when you think about it. It is truly, sort of an unprecedented in markets like that.
it and it was so good. I mean, some of us will remember when it wasn't available, and what a difficult life it was.
Hmm. Hmm.
But now it's so easy to it. And guess what? Technology is catching up with that and creating new problems, because
Mm.
we're now taking away some of those old networks where all of these was based on, the old 2G, 3G networks. So
Right.
if I fly to the US, as I've done recently, I got multiple phones and multiple SIM cards, by the way. So I got
Right.
a different plethora of messages. But pretty much one of them said, "I'm sorry, we can't really work in this country right now
Mm.
because
Hmm.
sorry. So try something else. Maybe try and find some good old Wi-Fi." That was a message, which in itself, it's the industry, looking down and say, "Ah, I tried, couldn't do it."
Right.
One of the messages I got from one of the roaming message I got is, "Well, why don't you try an OTT app?" They even mention an
Mm.
OTT app, which I'm thinking,
Wow.
it isn't this nonsensical? So you are a communication service provider. You go around and tell people, use my biggest competitor,
Right. Exactly. Yeah. That does not make
and
sense. Yeah.
no. And
Yeah.
all of it's for roaming, which is an incredibly still profitable service. So how is
Mhm.
that possible? And back to your question, before perfect question is, don't we have standards? We do have standards.
Mhm.
There is a technology issue, and we have a perfect path to remedy. But there is no sense of urgency.
Mhm.
And there is no, and that complies multiple elements. I mean, we can agree fantastic standards, but then one of them is called voice over LTE. As you can
Mhm.
imagine, LTE was a nominee for 4G. We're now living in 5G area,
Right.
but voice over LTE has not been deployed by all of these operators. And even in the second step, we have not signed agreement. So
Mm.
some of us to support it in the network. So our listeners, your listeners, probably know more than I do right now. But as MEF, we took this as one of the campaigns and supported by members and saying, isn't it time for us to discuss and look at how to go forward? Because
Mm.
we are taking away one of the service, almost in a hygiene element of a mobile ecosystem right now, which is your service will work pretty much
Right.
everywhere there is a mobile operator. And I think that's bad for the
Yeah.
industry. We should
Yes,
do.
for sure. I mean, that is the key thing you expected. Like you said, because it's been 20 years since this has been an issue that we faced as consumers, that you expect when the plane lands that you'll turn it on your phone and you'll get service, right? So,
We also played other things. I mean, another thing that I saw on the little message is how much the cost per megabyte was. And I
mhm.
did some quick calculation, and to watch an hour of Netflix or an hour of video services, OTT,
Mhm.
it would have cost me about $1,200.
Right. Yeah. The-
We might have another issue there, but we don't talk about, obviously, commercial propositions, but the industry as a whole
mhm.
has got an incredible profitable service there, but it's not looking at its long term and its position in the market. So some alarm bells should be
Mhm.
going around.
Yeah, because obviously a consumer is going to look at that and say, "Yeah, I'm not going to do that." Right. So there's no sense in putting out prices that are ones that no one will pay. Right. So yeah.
Yeah, well, I find for that specific phone, that's equivalent to about 6 years of my ARPU.
Right. Exactly. Yeah.
And I said, "What
Yeah.
did you realize? What we're asking is there?" Anyway, here we go. Plenty of activities, and there again, that shows how at the core of it, we need to have a common response, like a standard, but we need to have a common interaction that
hmm
activates and then make sure that that is followed and developed properly commercially. So
Right.
all of that part is part of the same process, and we need to in roaming we need to re-energize that discussion.
hmm hmm So there you go. There's already a good call to action that anyone in the mobile world out there, if they're not participating in MEF, that's a good reason to consider why you need to get together and talk about these things, right? So.
I may stop you there. Just I'm pretty, I'm bad at interviews. What have you done? What
Not
have
at
you
all.
done? I'll say it's a mobile thing. It's a wholesale thing,
Mm-hmm.
and because what some many operators and too many small operators by now to be able to really activate, but these can be solved at a different level, at a different
Mm-hmm.
level, and I
Mm-hmm.
think there's a lot more of expectations by now that the roaming hubs of this place they will be able to help you out some of it. Luckily, we're moving a lot of our services to a software base,
Mm-hmm.
which allows to do things in a different way as well. So there's a wider discussion there. I would like to encourage a wider discussion there.
Mm-hmm.
And telegeography so relevant to this market. Please be part of these discussions. I think the solutions might be in your field as well.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely, absolutely. So, um, well, let me bring us then to another topic that you already brought up, but that I think we could focus in on a lot more, which is fraud, but then maybe just more generally security. So, I talk a lot about the WAN side of things, wireline service, and all that, right? And there, of course, security has changed a lot in the last few years based on the changing nature of what private networks are, and especially after COVID with the sort of threat landscape atomizing all over the place, right? What has happened in mobile in terms of security in the last few years, and is that something that MEF works on? I imagine that the same forces, like more activities that are sensitive enterprise activities happening over mobile devices, more mobile devices connecting to networks and whatnot because people are working from everywhere all the time. Is security? You talked about fraud, but is security in general something that MEF is working on as well?
Yeah, and thanks for reminding me that, Greg. Because I should say, fraud is one thing, security is another. They kind of come hand in hand, but they're people will tell me two different things.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
And specifically because we're also relevant to another big topics what we do, which is personal data and identity. Again, an element there is no fraud there, but a potential element, even on privacy and other big themes that we do track. So back on what do we do?
Yeah.
Well, we start from the same. It's no magic recipe, but we start talking about stuff. And probably the first step is trying to have a framework of what's happening around us. So we've got all these intelligent people, real experts, talking and sometimes not understanding each other for a lot of time because they talk the same language, yet a different subset of the language, or they have a different scheme of things. So
Believe me, I understand that. I interview people from all areas of the telecom world, and that's half of what I do is translating in my head in real time. So yeah,
see, we need some of your skills here.
Yeah.
But and it's fun, because it's surprising we've got some of the Eureka moments coming there. One thing recently was, is security the same thing that it was 5 or 10 years ago? The answer is no. Do we think about security in the same way? No. Security started with the idea, even of protecting physical things, I understood. In the digital world, was really protecting your devices, because there was the endpoint where your service was consumed. So for us, it was security on the mobile, security on the SIM card.
Right.
And a lot of interesting and very good material still going there, by the way. But the next point, when it was obvious that it moved to another level, we had to secure your network, because it was a network on networks, something evident before. But now the nodes, the points were so many, and the control and the system in place were designed in the late 70s, when people, or even earlier, where people were all, behaving, as the large telcos, mostly nationalized, they should have a few numbers, and that was all, a different environment what it is now with the voice over IP, etc. This is open up to the nth number of players, good and bad. So network was the second point. Now, what we then realized, the most important thing recently, it's almost an escalation of that, is how do you secure your supply chain? Or are we going to use the word that we like a lot, your ecosystem? Again, your customer experience, the customer experience that your end customers will experience, is actually not yours anymore. You're using a lot, starting from, looking at our company, our software is hosted by somebody else, our network is somebody else, the way we communicate right now is from not a telecom player. How do we do all of that and yet provide a consistent experience?
Right.
A bank will look at the same, and they will look back. So we have a lot of discussion with procurement companies. And or the procurement departments of some very large companies as well, looking at how all of that can fit together, and do they understand how things go? Because that's one of the big risks right now, on just buying without knowing what you're getting and not knowing what happens on the other side of the contract.
And who you can call and whose responsibility it is and all that sort of thing. Yeah.
Exactly. Or the fact that they themselves, you will call them, but you don't know that they have to go and find out who they have to call themselves. This is a chain, and it goes on and on. And that's one of the weaknesses we talked about. So when we look at security, we probably have these, let's say, main themes right now, and we start trying to develop them. Security has changed its name, is now cybersecurity. For us in telecom, really, it's the same thing. Right. I can't imagine the cyber terms to mean anything else. It just means that what it was before, just your little, security, little, not really, what your big security remit for a telecom operator is now much bigger, because you are providing security that will, links up, as you always done, the banks with their customers, etc. And over networks that are not necessarily your networks anymore.
Right.
to give one of the examples. So that becomes an important element of how to build trust in the ecosystem. How can you make sure that some players are behaving the right ways? So probably, back to your original question, that's really what we're working a lot right now. How do we identify, create, and build some of that? And I have to say, some of the results are not super new. We built a code of conduct, or multiple code of conduct, just say, to make sure that when people agree, they respect these things, which include processes in the code of conduct. So when things go bad, what do you do? What is bad? What is good? So we have definitions that are out there. Back to your question, Greg, on talking about the same language. So for fraud and security as well, we identified terminology for people to report to in the same way. So that's some of the things to work on. It might not sound the most exciting things for us to be talking here, but you know what? It makes a big difference.
No, that's a really good point. So I think everyone thinks of this as a purely technical problem. Both fraud and security, perhaps in general, that oh, it's okay. I need the best cryptography, and I need the most strategically placed sort of gateways and firewalls and that. But ultimately, I think what you're saying is that it also comes down to a process and understanding the appropriate response and all that sort of thing. That is much more sort of like layers of abstraction above the actual technical parts.
And I think you're absolutely right. We need to talk about all of those things and all of those great solutions, including the role of AI that we have in this element, with the role of new solutions that are coming to the market. But yet, it's how you stitch them together. And what do you use versus what does the other guy next down on downstream in the chain using. It makes a big difference. So I'm thinking that you're perfectly right. Yet we are surprisingly looking at some of the big scandal recently involving operators, for instance, having passports information being released, and it happens in two countries right now at the same time. So I don't want to point who's a bad guy.
Sure.
And some of those were happening not because of cryptography or any lack of technology. It's just because somebody forgot to update to change a password.
That's right. I mean, that is very often the case, right? Security hackers are usually the successful ones are very low tech, right? They're building confidence with someone and gaining a credentials or something,
So welcome the technology and the discussion. We do want the discussions of what else is available there. But don't believe that just because you bought into the best of class of security solutions, you're there. We go through a lot of learning, even for internal, of what do you have in-house? Do you know what big companies don't even know what they have. Multiplication of systems, some of them very good, some of them less good.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. So you mentioned something that I want to focus on a little bit more, that you talked about the sort of whole ecosystem, like even down to devices. Is that something that you guys talk about, like the whole supply chain, not just the sort of mobile operators networks?
We go up and down in the supply in the chain, so we have no boundaries. We like it all.
That's great. Yeah,
it's probably a reflection. It used to be in the early 2000s much more about the devices that it is now, and it's a good. It's part of a standardization process. What we have seen, and we do have two big camps in terms of operating system right now. True. Right. They have good communication internally, so they what's happening there. So some of the discussions, and yet there are discussions that are happening at different levels because not everything is yet fully understood. But it is different. There's less discussions about the devices itself. So when we talked about the different layers, probably there was a higher concentration on devices 20 years ago, followed by network. Now the focus is probably more also on the supply chain level. Not that you should stop looking at the basic and so on. Never. Or the new devices, where there's more discussions about the IoT devices. While we understand a bit more what's happening in the personal device sphere, as I said, more mature, big player and big education and information happening there. The IoT camps has not been that good sometimes because we're buying equipment sometimes on the, it's a cheaper one. Hence our SME discussion, procurement and so on. Yeah, you might overachieve, but unfortunately, they might have a password for that specific model or something else, which is 1, 2, 3, 4. Now,
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
because it comes standardized with that. Is that your procurement technology? Does that allows Trojan access to the service? Are you putting something at risk? Yes, you are. And I'm talking about something that's mostly been addressed by now, but
Right.
it is recently still to be
Mhm.
said, but it's one of the clear examples of that moment. I do understand now why security needs to be a design feature from point one, can do
Right.
it again, and it needs to be an ecosystem of all the things that I will be employing to deliver the service, including who are my suppliers
Mhm.
and who am I supplier to. That perspective difficult to approach even if you are a CISO in a big company.
Right.
You don't have access to all of these people at once.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah, I mean that's the huge problem, right? Is a coordination problem across so many different stakeholders who make their decisions for different reasons and all that sort of thing. So yeah, so I also wanted to talk about another big issue that I think would be relevant to all sides here, like the providers, the end users, enterprises, and that's service provisioning and sort of turning around a service times and that sort of thing. I have one of these stories where you think, oh, that's not really true. I promise you. Literally yesterday, I was talking to the procurement head of a large, well-known business services company that has offices around the world, and she said, I just got told I have 60 days to bring up like an office in Guatemala or whatever. Right? So, this is a very real world problem that people struggle with on again both sides, the service providers and the end users and everything. So what are you guys doing in the mobile world to look at sort of service provisioning, about turning on new networks, spreading networks around the world, that kind of thing, keeping up with these demands, not just for like quick turnaround of turning an office on, but that as we've all gone back to the office and we're doing this kind of call instead of a handset or whatever, that the bandwidth demand keeps skyrocketing. And so they're looking maybe to mobile to shore that up. What would MEF sort of look at in terms of, that ability to provision service quickly and adequately and at the right bandwidths and all that kind of thing?
Well, you ask me easy questions, Greg. Thank
Yeah.
you. I can
Yeah.
easily. Well, okay. Starting, let's see if I can divide it up a bit. Starting, are we looking at it? Yes. Interestingly, service provisioning for the mobile world was a big concern 20 years ago because there was no mobile network. I remember I went to Greenfield. I helped to set up, it wasn't just me, a mobile operator. We were 5 the first day in a country, in Myanmar. And I can tell you, then you realize a lot of things. Is how do you build a network? Well, and we had we gave ourselves 6 months to start.
Mhm.
I think we did it almost. A
That
few
is
more days.
impressive in Myanmar. Yeah. So
It
yeah.
was impressive.
Yeah.
Remember all the questions that we had. We're not going into the details. This is an incredible story. I love to. All the people who work there have got also great stories to say. But back to that we're now living in a place where mobile operators exist. They have things in place, and yet service provisioning is today a big issue because of the volume, the expansions,
Right.
the demand, and the fact that the mobile network is by nature slightly more unpredictable in terms of what happens in spikes and demands and people moving, etc. It did do very well with COVID-19, surprisingly, so much that we're now seeing realizations and technology support to a fixed wireless, switch. It is happening at a faster rate as well because
Right.
we're reaching with new areas and so on. But on the service provisioning, the bandwidth demand is the key area. It's not covering of new territories, etc. I think geographically speaking, is more fixed wireless access, more than something else in terms of additional geographies for service. I would say, but the bandwidth demand is growing and is showing some issues on 5G, which we'll probably talk about 5G. 5G, there's a bit of a saying in the industry, which is even and odd numbers in generations of mobiles mean different things.
Kind of like the Star Trek films, like it was they odd numbered and even numbered had different quality for some reason.
The even number seems to have a better quality somewhere appreciated, being more appreciated by the market, let's say. So 5G is finding out that we're now seeing, first of all, it's a very expensive thing to do, as always they have. It is a much denser network in sometimes, depends on which flavors you choose. But bringing bandwidth there and bringing that quality of service, it's a big thing.
Right.
And what in the industry we refer to sometimes is the 2-bar 5G. So you get 5G, you don't get a 2-bar. But even when you look at it, the availability of the streaming of the great bandwidth promise is not realizing. It's not that much faster. Implementation.
Because of issues with tower radius, penetration, that kind of thing, basically.
And yes, all of that, and that specifically will be the two bars, the power or much is reaching you. But in the end, what we think is upstream, you don't have enough fiber coming to that. And that's really your service provision, your bandwidth. How do you give to a much more denser network? How do you bring up? Already was 4G was a big problem. How do you bring up so much granular bandwidth to all these points to push it out all of the service? And poor mobile operators, I used to be one of those planning for other services as well, but it's always the challenge increases continuously because you have to keep on building, you keep excavating on getting there. It's not just the tower itself, it's not just the antenna, and the fact that now you're more likely to share with others, etc. It's also how to bring that quality in so many places, because we're still kind of demanding more. Well, you could say 5G, however, you always need the odd number and the even number. Now, the promise is something much greater is arriving. And by the way, there is a 5.5G, which was discussed at MWC, the Mobile World Congress, just recently. So it will come in. And implementation operators are going to start spending a bit more. CapEx for operators, mobile operators, as we know, is becoming a difficult balance because the amount of money they can invest right now has been reduced by all the things that we do know, erosion in overall average revenue they get per connections, etc., etc. So you can imagine that 5G will take a bit more to evolve quality-wise. While the surprise and the good news is that the number of 5G devices coming to the market is very healthy. So people are finding it to their phones. People are using the services, etc.
Right. So I want to focus on something that you just said there, that the sort of average rates per user, the revenue coming in on a per user basis have gone down. What do you attribute that to mostly?
It's another 2-hour discussions we can have now here.
In your 30-second version of that 2-hour discussion,
Okay, I don't know, but I think that there is one big theme has been the commodizations of telecommunication services. What we're seeing
which would apply to all telecom services, not just mobile, certainly. So
and it started with if you want voice, but SMS and data. Now we all needed, I should say, some of the services that we do expect. So the service itself, if you look even at data as a service, rather data is just a transparent part of the service. I am now doing. I need to watch my TV and use an IP connections. I want it, but I don't think much how much I spend it. I'd rather be thinking of my money into the service itself.
Right.
That's what I get excited about. People were super excited in the early 2000s or the late 90s. People would know is the Nokia phones, if you remember those things, as a sequential numbers. And I was working, I couldn't know it, but my friends were telling me about these as 6030 versus the 5287. So what are you talking about?
Right.
Their level of excitement has gone. With that has gone their level of expectations. And unfortunately, the operators have also competed, because there was a regulatory framework we found, into pricing, because there's been the arrival of multiple frequency and multiple bands. great things to also improve the competition, but the services, but mostly the coverage at one point. Reduced right now because it was kind of strangling the competition, was creating a price competition, everything, and reducing the potential for the long-term investment that were necessary in the industry as well. So that's and as much as this is a very contentious ratio, many of my members will say, yes, more players, welcome, or fewer. We have seen that at the network level, there's been a compression. There is much more active and passive network sharing. And the only reason why that is so common is because it's really expensive to build new networks that are more dense, etc.
Right.
And the entire industry, if you look at the output, has gone down dramatically in terms of relevance and importance. We also seen how the buying power of customers is reduced, and they think rather be buying something else, buying this,
Right.
etc. So put it all together, our 2 hours and a half of discussion.
Yeah.
I think that's what is happening. There is multiple regulatory and market pressure that has helped to the price, the accessibility of bandwidth to go down so fast. Meanwhile, the excess capacity in terms of powers or buying power has been taken by the services on top rather than telco below. That meant everything more expensive for a telco to think and roll out.
Right.
6G has got that written in front of his of the standards pretty much right now, even if it doesn't fully exist. This is well, how do we afford this? Is now a very, very big component of that.
No, that makes sense. That makes a lot of sense. So, and if I were talking to an ISP, I think in some respects that story wouldn't be that different, right? It's my consumers are using me to get to the OTT services that I bring to them, and so the eyeballs just aren't worth the same in that sense, and other pressures have driven the cost per bit of bandwidth down. So is there a sense in which your mobile phone is not different than your sort of Cat 6 cable coming out of your home Wi-Fi router, right? It's like it's become a commodity to deliver a whole bunch of other things to you that the provider doesn't get any sort of revenue from, right? So
and you're absolutely right that we sell in that way. And by the way, you're the expert at telegeography. You can tell me, but what is this bandwidth, these bits of data, going from where to where? Where is it going? Because you just mentioned Wi-Fi, which we cover in math because it's a mobile experience. Yet it ends up being on ISP a lot of the time. Well, equally, I could say that a lot of the wholesale traffic, the majority of wholesale traffic, voice, non-voice, it's probably mobile traffic right now, where the wholesale is playing.
Good
So,
point. Yeah.
and I am thinking, well, you got the numbers, so I will refer to them as soon as you share one. But that's what I'm thinking, that it's a different area we are in, where it's difficult to make it distinguish between mobile and fixed as we used to do at one point.
Right. Yeah. I mean, we have that problem in our data, absolutely. But I can tell you with certainty that yes, a lot of voice calls as such, not OTT calls or whatever. Well, lots of OTT calls too. We can't see that, but are terminating to mobiles, right? That's where people still actually dial a phone number, right? So is in the mobile space,
So we live the same larger ecosystem, and we as MEF realize that, and so we understand that fixed and mobile are now following the same pattern because they almost link as the same service, so to speak. So that's why no surprise that the maturity of the services is equal now.
Right.
The adoption in usage, there's more moving to mobile, but again, it's using the same framework.
Right, especially on the sort of wholesale side, right? So yeah, absolutely. So before we wrap up here, you've broached the topic several times. I want to dive in a little bit more on 6G. It does 5G has been on everyone's minds for so long, and now we're sort of finally there. Certainly with mobile service, a little bit getting there with fixed wireless access. You mentioned that 6G, one of the impediments might be just revenue justification, but could you take us through sort of, well, first of all, certainly your even and odd analogy a little bit more, right? And what would 6G do? So I'm not a mobile guy, but it was always been my understanding that with 5G, the great leap forward was primarily the amount of bandwidth, right? Just the actual throughput, as well as some other things like network slicing and whatnot. What is it about 6G that would be worth adopting? Is it just yet again more bandwidth? Are there other features that would make it worth putting money and thought into?
Yes. And I'll come back to my point, which we are not doing the standards.
Right,
So I'm
right,
taking
right.
as a neutral point. And
Yeah,
that's
yeah.
why it's easier for me to talk good about what they're doing as well, and because they're really trying to do their best, and as well as give them some challenges as a feedback. And the feedback with 5G is definitely about bandwidth. The other part is about business, which we don't talk about a lot, is a lot about 5G. The industry is moving from a consumer-led market to business-led market, which is also representations of, if you want, the telecommunication is everything is wholesale or everything is business, because you're now providing service for somebody else.
Right.
Effectively, is how people are looking at it. So if you look at the 5G specs, there's a lot of it, but don't touch me and you as consumers, but we touch the company that will provide services to us.
Right.
Including IoT, including how many devices we can have with them, very questions of network latency and so on. Which again, if you're for voice and other things, I think the human like me and you we don't know about this new latency requirement because we can't perceive them, but they're so important when you try to do something with humans, even VR or AR, etc., etc. So there's a lot of good stuff in 5G. Which hasn't seen the light yet, but is now fundamental for something that will come later.
Right.
And the bandwidth question we're talking about, it has unfortunately hit the same wall, which is where is it coming from, how you attach, is your network, and it will take time. The good thing, and the reason why probably even versus odd numbers, is it takes time to build that level of bandwidth.
Right. Again, especially with 5G and the spectrum that it's using, having a limited radius, having poor penetration, the tower density has to be a lot higher. And to your point, something lay people, even some people in the industry, forget is that the only wireless part of the journey is from your device to the tower, right? So
we get excited about the mobility, but we're still talking to and 95% of investment somewhere goes on other things. But that 5% is now very, very important.
Right.
And in some markets, it's much more than 5% investment.
Right.
Depends on the structure and so on. But it's a magic of where everything becomes mobile. But it's becoming so dense again. And there are different flavors of 5G, and we can talk about it. But we can see how the issues of bandwidth is what we were talking about. But 5G, and talking about things that I don't understand because I'm not intelligent enough, has got all of this great technology behind it. How they use antennas. And how the antennas are receiving a set. That's the frequency used as well. Incredible in trying to be faster and more efficient.
Right.
They're using a lot of power and raw power at the moment as well, which happens during an economic crisis, which is also an energy crisis and an environmental crisis. And the question is, 5G good or bad for environment? We'll see later. The judges are there, but the 5G uses a lot of data, of energy.
Right.
It's probably taken as is true. Now, you could say there are efficiencies, you're sending so much stuff out there. Yes, but you're still using a lot of energy. Right. And energy does account to a lot of the expenditure in TLC.
Yeah, absolutely.
Telecommunications and etc. And a lot of the emissions, if you're about 3.5%, we believe, of emissions from the ICT world for CO2. So
that is really high. That surprises me. Yeah, interesting.
It surprised me as well. Not on our number. I think others have signed up to it. One of them being GSMA as well, which represents the mobile operators. So I think it's a solid number that we should believe. And it's ICT in its wider, and includes me and you, and the amount we use for these phones and everything else, which is definitely billions of people, and the number scales up. And quickly, when you come up to 6G, I say, what do we have to look at? And not surprisingly, you can do a lot of exciting things with radios. Just like 5G has done lots of exciting things with radios. And one of them would be even using radio as a radar. And if anybody's interested in 5G or specific 5G, or maybe Star Wars or Star Trek. That's some of the things we've been talking about. So they will be able to use that to identify you specifically and see where you are, what you do. Fantastic application. So, and not about telecommunication itself.
Right.
So we're looking at all around, how to make sense of the world using the 5G and 6G now network. Another element which we expect and where there's a lot of discussion is the efficiency, which is interesting. It's moving away from the radio access almost to other elements of. Definitely, we're going to see improvements in speed and delivery, etc. But it becomes less and less, even if more required and important, less the sexy bit. We're trying to find out new things that are coming. But the other things that 6G needs to look at is what's happening at the bottom, which is everything is turning into software.
Right.
Well, so those are some of the big things that have been put forward in their discussions. And do I need to say after our discussions, affordability a bit for an operator? Who pays for what?
Right.
So that's part of the discussions. And sometimes we will say even models of usage. It's not a surprise that the biggest announcement for Mobile World Congress, and I'm apologize if you're not mobile, and I'm quoting that twice, but it's a big thing that happens in Barcelona. Please. Believe it or not, hundreds of thousands of people are there, including lots of a fixed environment. And why? Because that is changing a lot of the services we're looking at. API was a big discussion.
Right.
API, it was a big announcement about how it's not the first time, and it didn't be like, some types of, this is a sequel in our cinematography parallel world. This is definitely the third sequel, and some people are looking at it skeptical, surprising. However, The Godfather might tell you that, you might still have a big surprise coming later. So these APIs, not the first time that GSMA or the mobile industry attempts to provide these APIs, but it might be a significant step, even if not necessarily noted too much until now in the industry. And it's what you would expect 6G and others to do, to standardize access to some of the magic information we told you about, using 6G, using the radio networks as a radar to identify where things are, how they are, what they are doing, as well as the payment identity and other things that constitute right now the mobile network bone.
That means it's going to have to include blockchain, right? So you can't get it through a conversation in tech right now without someone bringing up blockchain. It's just the bane of my existence.
we almost made it, Greg, until the end. You had to bring it. But yeah, in mind, and in mind, let's do it with bingo. Web 3.0, which does include and other key questions of how we're going to be using the future services. If let's not use metaverse, even if it's another little tick into the bingo that you would play. But if it's not metaverse, the new reality exploring technology, AR, VR, etc.
Wow, I mean that's really interesting stuff that I would like to keep up with. Maybe I need to convince my boss to send me to Barcelona to go to Mobile World Congress next year.
We'll host you. Don't worry, I've met so many of us there.
Excellent. Well, this has been a really interesting, useful conversation for me, and I'm sure our listeners as well, especially to get kind of. I find interesting to see just how many parallels there are between the mobile and the wireline world, and how a lot of these challenges are so similar. Dario, how can listeners keep up with you and your work at MEF?
The easiest thing, I would say, go to our website, which is www.mobileecosystemforum.com. It's a long name, but it will work. Mobileecosystemforum.com. In there, you can also subscribe to our weekly newsletter, which shows a few things that we're doing. Because, yes, we're doing a lot of things, and we're really exciting. And a lot of things we do realize are now common to, as you were saying, to fix a mobile. So a lot of interesting conversation would love to have with you guys.
Yeah, excellent. All right. Thanks so much for joining me. This was great fun.
Thank you.
All right. Cheers. Thanks for listening. Telegeography Explains the Internet comes from the experts here at Telegeography. It's edited and produced by Jane Miller, and it's hosted by me, Greg Bryan. And I also wrote that theme song you're listening to right now. To learn more about our data, jump over to telegeography.com, and we'll see you on the internet.